You have been busy on Twitter, not just putting together these great Twitter threads and breaking down what announcements the U.S. is making and what it means and stuff like that. Which even when you're not on the show, we're talking about it on the show.
Right.
But you've had some pretty sassy combats to some of the worst of the hots, and so I just wanted to go through some of these tweets and your responses. The first is from Jeremy. Was it Boring? He's from the Daily Wire. And
Yeah.
he says we should not have pulled our troops from Afghanistan. He puts a period and then he writes period with a period. So, well, tell us about this one.
Yeah, I just thought this is funny. This is a high up guy at the Daily Wire. It's supposed to be this like big conservative outlet. And my quip was just sort of like I'm not sure what's so conservative about a gigantic multi-trillion dollar nation building project that expropriated all this money from American taxpayers. I thought these conservative guys are supposed to be, limited government or whatever. They like to talk a nice libertarian game, but of course when it comes to actually ending a gigantic government policy like this, he's completely opposed to it. And I just of course, didn't get any answer from him. I said, I wonder if you could explain what's so conservative about that policy. He never did explain it to me, but I just thought that was ironic for the Mr. Conservative man to be backing such a Wilsonian kind of give the world democracy kind of policy.
Well, it's interesting that as soon as Biden, starts to do anything to the war state at all, the Republicans instantly give up. At least all the mainstream Republicans instantly give up any of the, kind of pretext of end the endless wars that they had kind of muttered during the Trump, or even Obama years because it was politically popular among the base. But now that they could blame it on Biden, I think they're able to, like the Republican voters are willing to hate on Biden. That feeling is stronger for them over than their desire to end the wars, and so we're seeing just a lot more of this kind of like low IQ Republican trying to dunk on Biden for ending this thing. And yeah, the pullout wasn't the greatest thing, Will, but at the same time, it was the right decision to get our troops out of there. Republicans, particularly conservative Republicans, should be praising Biden for at least this. Next up, we
Absolutely.
have Charles Lister, who says, in many respects, Afghanistan represents the first real implementation of ending forever wars doctrine. The results thus far, and he has 5 bullet points here: crumbling of a democratic government, Taliban rule, Al Qaeda ecstatic, emergency mass evacuation, unprecedented transatlantic divisions. So, Will, what do you think of it? What did you say about this one?
Yeah, I just love that this is all attributed to ending the war, as if this is not a result of the 20-year exercise that we just attempted. All the things he just listed are reasons and proof of why it was such a failure. But he's saying that no, that only happened when you leave. But like obviously this stuff is very long in the making. We just spent 20 years there doing all this stuff, building this so-called democratic government that collapsed before we were even out of there. I mean, at least with the Soviets, their communist puppet state, at least that thing stood for like a year or so before, after they left, before the thing collapsed. We weren't even out of the country yet before ours did. And it's just, I don't know, it's just incredible to blame this on the withdrawal and not the 20 years of, effort that we put in prior to that.
Yeah. Well, the first bullet point, the part that really upset me was calling it a democratic government. I've been
Right.
saying this, that a lot of these hots are pretending that up until a week ago, or I guess now 3 weeks ago, Afghanistan was France and they just held regular elections. And Ghani was the guy who got elected and he formed a government. And it wasn't, years of elections being delayed. And then once it finally happened, thousands of polling sites didn't even open. And there was violence at tons of polling sites. Polling workers were killed. I think only like 20% of eligible voters actually voted in the election. And once it finally happened, it took 9 months to call, or 6 to 9 months to call a winner. And once they called a winner, the top two candidates both decided they were winners,
That's right.
swore themselves in, and actually were both on TV holding in campaign swearing in ceremonies. And then the guy who got declared the winner by the West actually had to negotiate with his top competitor and allow him into his government. It wasn't even a situation where, he just won the election. That was it. Taliban rule isn't a problem. Al Qaeda, I haven't heard Al Qaeda is static at all. And in fact, the Taliban consider themselves the enemy to the main I guess jihad, the closest thing to a real jihadist group that you have in Afghanistan right now, ISIS-K. The emergency evacuations are just a result of ending a 20-year occupation, and the last note, the unprecedented transatlantic divisions. Well, this one cracks me the hell up because this is the one thing that these people said Biden was supposed to fix. Now there is a little bit. Now I think he's far exaggerating that this is unprecedented, but the UK, their parliament did condemn Biden for this, like specifically passed like I think it was like a resolution or the equivalent of that. But it is interesting that you have so many people upset within NATO for the U.S. ending this war finally, and that being the reaction of so many people. Anything else on the list or tweet?
No, that's pretty much it.
All right. Eli Lake is up next, who says the anti-war movement has finally gotten what it wanted, that they ended the forever war in Afghanistan. As a result, women will return to bondage, our allies will be murdered, America has been humiliated, and Afghanistan is a safe haven for terror.
Yeah, my response to that was America humiliated itself as soon as it embarked on the impossible mission of giving Afghanistan a liberal democracy in a box. And then, of course, I mentioned that Lake says nothing. He does not mention the brutal warlords that we got into bed with to make this great, liberal democracy happen. He mentions nothing about the absolute endemic corruption of the Afghan government that just for years has been, ground to a halt by this corruption. And that, we see the results of just how the whole thing had been hollowed out. It collapsed immediately. And then, of course, the torture, too. That torture has been absolutely endemic and widespread in the Afghan security forces. So like all this stuff he's saying of like, oh, what a disaster this is all becoming. Like, where were you when all this other stuff had been happening? All the, these very dark things, especially the torture. I mean, that's not an anomaly. I mean, it seems like all the regimes that we sort of like, the little puppet states that we back, there's always massive allegations of torture. I mean, even going to like the Iraqi forces that we work with, the militias that we work with over there, insane levels of torture. And so that is sort of like an MO of people we get into bed with, is that they torture people to death. But of course, Eli Lake will have he'll make no mention of that. Afghanistan was just this peaceful, great liberal democracy until the second we left, apparently.
Yeah, this one was something else. But Will, what I want to point out with this tweet is I'm starting to see a narrative form here where the Hawks are trying to spin this to blame everything on the people who have opposed this stupid war all along. It's absolutely crazy, and we could get into more when we break down the Wolfowitz and Kagan articles coming up. But they just keep adding to it. Anything else about our friend Eli Lake?
No, that's pretty much it.
All right, this next one, Will, is almost crazy. It's the Richard Haas tweet, and I guess I didn't load it up. But he basically says that the occupation in Afghanistan is no different than U.S. deploying troops to Germany, Korea, or Japan. And this guy, just to clarify, we're not like picking on scrubs here or anything like that. This isn't like, the lady who writes at the Washington Post on the food blog or something like that. She writes about like, the new food coming out in Russia or Iran or wherever else. No, this is the head of the Council on Foreign Relations saying this, that there's just no different, and we shouldn't define troops being in Afghanistan differently than Japan.
Yeah, I mean, I had a more narrow point on this one. I just I just made the point about, because he's saying, oh, this is not an occupation, it's just like a presence, it's a perfectly legitimate presence. And I just made the point that, like, can you really say that when you went in and removed the original government that was in power, installed your own puppet regime, and oh yeah, they endorse our presence there, so no, it's not an occupation. Like I made that slightly narrower point, but I think you had more of a substantial critique of that one.
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, it was just, in a way, it seems unbelievable that the U.S. could, know that Afghanistan was the graveyard of empires, go in there, waste $2.3 billion, thousands of Americans dead, hundreds of thousands of Afghans dead, and produce absolutely nothing of value in 20 years. I mean, arguably, like, made a lot of the justice in the country worse with the massive amount of corruption that you had, the rampant rape of children. I think it was like in 2006 or so this is a while ago. But, they're quoted, like, for the women saying that the difference was, before you couldn't go out of the house without your husband, but now if you do, you get raped. And that's not better justice. That's not an improvement. You're not.
No.
You're maybe shifting some of the problems in the society, but ultimately you're not making anything better.